Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be listing my top 10 favorite 3DS games, well, from a democratic selection. So, most YouTubers have done the whole top 10 lists over and over again, and I wanted to do something a little different. So I decided, since I love the concept of spirits in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, I may even say that's my favorite new concept to be introduced in video games, I decided that rather than trying to attempt to show terrible footage because I don't have a 3DS capture card, I'm going to represent my favorite 3DS games using Smash Bros. Style spirit battles. So enjoy a more unorthodox take. Also, these are not in order. This is just the order that I happened to have them recorded, and so make of it what you will based on the enthusiasm in my voice, as everyone's opinions are subjective. So, without further ado, use your imagination to best figure out how I represented each of the games by spirits, and let's go. Super Mario 3D Land, the Mario game that was tailor-built with Nintendo's powerful handheld in mind, especially the stereoscopic 3D. This is one of those Mario games that is not for those who are afraid of heights, because when you're falling down trying to get the top of the flagpole, you really feel like the height is real. Now, some of you may be wondering why I like this game so much more than Super Mario 3D World, as I seem to give that game way too much hate. Well, it's because this was tailor-made for the 3DS, and it works so much better with stereoscopic 3D. I mean, you would think Nintendo would have implemented this earlier if they had the technology so that players could tell where Mario is moving in 3D space. But even as its own product, this was a pretty unique idea at the time, to take the Mario series, which had sort of branched off into spin-offs, 3D Marios and 2D Mario, and kind of blend them all together, where it's linear like the 2D Marios, but Mario moves on a 3D plane like the 3D Marios. While the music is kind of lackluster, and the graphics could definitely be better, overall this is a really fun game that starts out really easy, but then eventually tests how well you really know Mario. With that, this is often dirt cheap since it was one of the earliest 3DS games, and in my opinion, still one of the best. The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. A lot of people confuse A Link Between Worlds as a remake of A Link to the Past because it shares the same world map, basic graphical style, and the same placement of most of the dungeons. However, in Japan, this game is called Triforce of the Gods 2, which Triforce of the Gods 1 was A Link to the Past's title in Japan. However, it started out as a remake of A Link to the Past. So, confusing identity aside, this is by far my favorite Zelda game on the 3DS. The other two were remakes, and the other Zelda game was a weird Four Swords-esque spin-off. A Link Between Worlds not only felt like a proper Zelda game, but a good blueprint into the open world direction that was to come in Breath of the Wild. A Link Between Worlds gave you a lot of freedom, but not just in how you explored the world. It also gave you freedom in how you approached the game as a whole, because you had two amazing new mechanics that really helped A Link Between Worlds stand out. First off, you had Ravio's Shot, which allowed you to choose between renting or buying items. You could also buy them in pretty much any order, which meant you could go into a dungeon with all of the items and approach it with a brand new strategy, or you could take just the minimal and see if you could make the game harder for yourself. The catch is that if you only rented an item, you'd have to go and re-rent it if you died. So there was a nice risk-reward factor. If you wanted to buy the items, then you needed to farm for more rupees, so that encouraged players to go and explore. And there's a lot of good stuff to find in A Link Between Worlds. This is one of the most satisfying Zelda games to complete if you really know what you're doing. However, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the other great aspect, which is the merging, which allows Link to sort of meld into a wall and shimmy along on any surface. This gives you a whole new perspective on 2D Zelda and makes for some of the most incredible puzzles the Zelda series has ever seen. Couple that with amazing use of stereoscopic 3D and an incredible orchestral soundtrack, and you've got an oldie but a goodie on the 3DS library. Zero Time Dilemma, the third and final game in the Zero Escape trilogy. Well, I could easily also include its prequel, Virtue's Last Reward, on this list because it also came out in the 3DS. I personally prefer the third entry the most because of its amazing gameplay style, how it wraps up the entire series really nicely, in my opinion. That may be an unpopular opinion, but it's still mine regardless. And because overall it just felt the most grand and epic. Basically, without trying to spoil the whole Zero Escape series too much, Zero Escape takes place within multiple timelines, but you don't really know where in time-space you are. So you choose between 3 different teams that are all playing a survival of the fittest type of experience within a bomb shelter, and you choose how you want to play each team's order, but also which order of events the teams are doing. So essentially you can possibly go straight to the end of the game before you've even experienced the middle half. And the joy of Zero Time Dilemma is piecing together how does everything fit? What is the ultimate goal? What is the best order to play this in? Couple that with amazing voice acting, Matthew Mercer as Sigma, and it feels like a wonderful conclusion to a wonderful trilogy. And if you don't think the game version is good enough, I also wrote a novelization called Zero Time Dilemma Sigma's Story, so please check that out if you don't think the game did good enough. Granted, the puzzle rooms can be kind of annoying, but at least they help it feel more like a game rather than an extensive visual novel. And if you like escape rooms, well, guess what? That's just an added bonus for you. Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright. Future me is going to be laughing so hard if either Layton or Phoenix end up making it into the game after I make this video, because this is the best I could do with what the Fighters Pass and the base roster gave me. This ended up being one of my longest reviews on YouTube because you have 2 series that are both known for being very heavy on writing and logic puzzles, and they're both almost perfectly represented. Like, you really feel like you're playing a new entry in either series, and both of them are crossing over. So to try to keep this under 3 minutes is definitely going to be a challenge, but I shall do my best. Basically, Layton games are known for having a lot of solving puzzles. These could be logic puzzles, trying to solve a problem by word playing, or trying to find the ultimate mystery at the end of being in a strange town. Phoenix, on the other hand, is a lawyer known for exposing lies and contradictions and trying to prove his client innocent. So to make these 2 series cross over, you've got the main heroes transported to a realm known as Labyrinthia, where everything is in medieval times style. And so, from Layton's point of view, he's curious about why such a town exists in the 21st century. And from Phoenix's perspective, he sees that innocent girls are being accused of being witches, and so he has to use the logic of witchcraft and magic to prove that this girl is not a witch. Of course, since the title is Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright, both of them are eventually going to have a big conflict, which you can probably guess what it is right now, but just in case you can't, I'll leave it up to you to figure out when they're eventually going to break ways. But the series wonderfully both makes them mesh together and stand on their own so much that it's like you're getting 2 games for the price of 1. The music and presentation is all absolutely fantastic and is well worthy of the name Level 5 as the publisher. In fact, the soundtrack is done so well that newbies to either franchise might have trouble figuring out which songs are remakes and which ones were composed specifically for the game. It's also got great voice acting, albeit not full voice acting, but still better than nothing. And some amazing use of stereoscopic 3D. And all of its DLC is both free, and it only takes up 1 block on 3DS's memory. So go ahead and download even more goodness. So with that, I fanboyed about this game so much in my original review that I'll leave you to watch that if you want more of it. But if I was doing this list based on actual rankings, this would definitely probably be number 1 or 2. Donkey Kong Country Returns, although admittedly, the title of the game is actually almost the name of the song that I chose, so how cool is that? So this is actually a port/remake of the original Donkey Kong Country, while at the same time not being a remake. There's actually 2 distinct modes you can play. You can play normal mode, which is basically where it just plays like a handheld equivalent of the Wii version, with the same brutally hard difficulty and not too much to help you out as far as the items. And then there's the new easy mode, which increases the number of hits Donkey Kong can take. It also gives you helper items and the ability to buy the orbs required to enter the Golden Temple. And you also get 9 brand new levels that weren't in the original Wii version. What makes this port especially incredible is that it wasn't even done by the original team at Retro. Yet in some respects, the new levels are about as good, if not better, than the ones in the main game. However, if you don't want to talk comparison, Donkey Kong Country Returns is a brilliant game in every sense of the word, because while it is very, very hard, it's also fair at the same time. And even if easy mode still is too hard for you, there's always the super guide. The levels feel like they're telling a gigantic story, maybe not as much as Tropical Freeze does, but there's still a lot of dynamic action, both the foreground and the background. Sometimes you have to choose between them. And there's a lot of bombastic set pieces and fun stuff going on the screen. If you're worried that the new Super Mario Bros. Series is going too stale, well, the Donkey Kong Country series is just getting started. Radiant Historia, Perfect Chronology. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you haven't even heard of this title, as it came pretty late in the DS's lifetime, on Ash Wednesday in 2018. Never gonna forget that day. However, I would be even less surprised if you hadn't even heard of the original Radiant Historia, which was a pretty late DS release that dealt with the topic of an RPG with time traveling. On its own, it doesn't really seem like that big of a deal. Like, how many RPGs don't have time travel? But what makes Radiant Historia unique is that sometimes events in one timeline directly influence the others, as opposed to learning from other timelines like other characters might do. Not only that, but the 3DS version is basically an entire reimagining of the story, making it feel like the definitive, complete experience. You've got full voice acting, brand new art, and even entirely new chapters. While the DLC is certainly controversial, making you pay money to do a fan servicey chapter where everyone's in a hot tub, make up your mind about that. Plus, having to pay money just to get the original DS artwork is another weird choice by Atlas. But overall, Radiant Historia has the perfect mix of story and action to keep RPG enthusiasts happy, and people looking for a good story can just play on the friendly difficulty if they want to bypass the somewhat confusing battle system. In addition to that, if you're a fan of the original DS version, you might find this worth a second look for the really good voice acting, especially the announcer from Smash Bros. Voicing the main character, and it actually wraps up the story in a more conclusive way than the DS version did. So if you thought that ending was cool, you haven't seen anything yet. Oh, and Yoko Shimomura did the music, so do yourselves a favor and listen to her, as she's pretty amazing. Kid Icarus Uprising. This is the kind of game that people love to hate for its controls alone, while sometimes ignoring that nearly everything else about this game is pretty darn amazing. Especially at the time it came out in 2012, we were pretty mesmerized that this game was capable of having graphics almost on par with, if not better than, the Wii, and yet you could play it on the go. So Kid Icarus Uprising was directed by Masahiro Sakurai, of all people, the guy who's in charge of the Smash Bros. Games, and yeah, you can kind of tell by how much insane levels of content there are. There's lots of stuff to unlock. The game's story is actually deceptively long. At first, you feel like it's, just a pretty simple story, but then there's like a twist that makes it go on longer. Overall, this has some of the best production values I have ever seen on a handheld exclusive game. The game is fully 100% voiced, which is a rarity on handheld titles, and good voice acting too, by a lot of quality celebrities, including Troy Baker. The humor, which is often super self-aware, actually references other Nintendo games and is also just as hilarious. And the music is stellar! A lot of this stuff, I would not be surprised if this was in an ancient, old-fashioned movie that they just optimized for the newer hardware. Now, the controls are of course going to turn most people off from this masterpiece. And admittedly, I was one of those people because I am terrible at shooters. And so I thought, oh great, a shooter with a weird control scheme. However, if you take the time to really master it and get used to it, then you'll find that you can pull off some amazing maneuvers that I'm not sure would be possible on a traditional controller. And overall, the sense of satisfaction when you do get a higher score is really insane, and I can't think of too many action games that would otherwise fill that void. So give the game a try. Not if you're a lefty. The game really has some over-the-top options for left-handed players, but if you're right-handed and you've got a 3DS to spare, especially if it's a new 3DS, as you're really going to want to see these eye-popping graphics on a big screen, I think Kid Icarus Uprising, if you can look past the controls, is going to be a worthy addition to your 3DS library. Oh yeah, and there's adjustable difficulty, so if worst comes to worst, just make it so that the difficulty's all the way down, and that way the story will still be all the way up. Hyrule Warriors Legends. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Oh no, Paul, not that disaster of a terrible frame rate port of a Wii U game. Well, while it's true that the game is pretty bad on the original 3DS hardware, it was magnificently optimized to take advantage of the added horsepower of the new 3DS. And if you look past the frame rate issues and vastly inferior graphics, you'll find that this is by far the definitive experience of Hyrule Warriors, well, assuming you don't have a Switch, that is. This version added most of the content from the Wii U version, including all of the story mode chapters, plus also added a bunch of quality of life updates and new content to make this feel like a fresh experience. There's a new side tale that involves Linkle, which at first glance seems like just a female version of Link, but she does feel enough like her own character where I could see her standing side by side with Link in another game and coexisting as her own Zelda character. You've also got the ability to warp, which greatly cuts down on the amount of running around and backtracking you do, and you can switch between different characters to play as, which lessens the backtracking even more. You've also got new, well, everything. New adventure mode maps, new music, new characters, new scenarios. You can even visit some locations from Wind Waker, which I did not think was possible on 3DS hardware. Then, if you play it on the new 3DS, it actually runs as smoothly, if not better, than the Wii U version. And in some cases, I would even say it could give the definitive edition on the Switch a run for its money, although I also haven't played it since then, so maybe not. While there is quite a lot of DLC to sort through, I would say that even the base game will give you more than enough bang for your buck if you're looking for high-action Zelda games that are less about story and more about action, as it preserves all of the amazingly cool combos and sick, heavy enemy-filled battlefields. I really could use better wording for that, but oh well. Plus, it has the entirety of the original Hyrule Warriors' soundtrack, which, well, it's definitely going to be hit or miss in some areas. There are some truly outstanding orchestra pieces if you know where to look. So if you can't get the version on the Switch, which contains all of the content of both versions, Hyrule Warriors whatever, I can't speak. Get this game if you don't have a Switch. Super Smash Bros. For 3DS. Can you guess what system this released on initially? So, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate has come along since then, and, well, you can probably tell by now that that's made this version pretty much obsolete in my humble opinion. There are still people that'll defend Smash for 3DS, and power to them, but this game also doesn't have spirits. However, what it does have is a surprisingly compact Smash on the go experience that proved that handhelds were just as capable of having a full-fledged Smash experience as its console counterparts. There were definitely some stuff that got lost during the transition, such as a whole story mode being cut. Leakers. And a lot of the modes being absent, but on the other hand, this also brought along an insanely huge roster of characters, and even included the likes of characters that we thought would never be seen in a Smash Bros. Game, such as adding Cloud and Mega Man. Mega Man was a dead franchise at the time, and well, Final Fantasy VII was notorious for not being on a Nintendo system. Oh, how times have changed. So, If you can't get Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, or even Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, fun fact if you know what system that version released for as well, Smash for 3DS's big draw is that it has well-designed stage that feel like they were designed with the handheld in mind, so they're far less chaotic and more doable than most of the other stages in the series. It also has a pretty decent selection of soundtrack, small by the console version standards, but still decent, and it has Smash Run, which has yet to have its own equivalent in another Smash game, where you run around a huge map and you fight hordes of enemies that are based on Nintendo franchises. Sometimes third-party reps get in there too. And it feels like a perfect amalgamation of if Kirby Air Ride crossed over with Smash Brothers. While one could argue that there's way too many Kid Icarus Uprising references in this game, since Sakurai had actually just wrapped up development on that game shortly before doing this, it's still a must-buy experience if you don't have the ability to get the 2 latest installments in the Smash Bros. Series. But if there is someone out there that has made a story mode for this game, I will gladly actually accept a ROM hack for probably the first time in my life. Please, someone tell me where I can find Smash Bros. 3DS, the story. Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia. There are a lot of Fire Emblem games on the 3DS, 4 to be exact if you count Warriors. And I wanted to choose just one, as I think all of them are good, but Echoes is definitely my favorite as far as which Fire Emblem game would I want to play the most on the 3DS. So this is actually a remake of a Famicom exclusive game in Japan known as Fire Emblem Gaiden. However, we Americans are experiencing it for the first time. And even though parts of it felt like, yeah, this is definitely remake territory, at the same time, it still felt like a natural evolution in the Fire Emblem series. While the turn-based battles are still there, and it still plays like a traditional Fire Emblem game, the quality of life changes helped it stand apart from the pack. It was the first Fire Emblem game to have full voice acting, well, almost full, like maybe 10% of the dialogue is not voiced, but all of the major scenes are, as well as all of the support conversations. You could also explore full 3D dungeons. The music was jaw-droppingly awesome. Like, listen to the soundtrack sometime and try not to be amazed. And it featured a branching path storyline that wasn't too radical like some people might have been disappointed with in Radiant Dawn. Not only that, but it helped breathe new life into sort of the black sheep of the Fire Emblem family back in Japan. And I'm really thankful that the more modern Fire Emblem entries, well, I guess at this point only one, Fire Emblem Three Houses, has taken the lessons learned in Echoes and really applied them to saying, like, yeah, this is how Fire Emblem is going to be moving forward. Especially that voice acting. Man, can you imagine a Fire Emblem world where the lines weren't voiced? The one downside to Echoes that I think might turn off a lot of people is that it requires you to be very grindy to actually stand a chance near the end game, and it really pushes you to get the DLC so that you can be practically unstoppable. But if you can look past that and the somewhat lackluster map design, you'll find a really touching story that really gets you thinking. And you'll find some of the most compelling protagonists in Fire Emblem history, although I'm personally still an Ike guy myself, but you be the judge. Either way, this is one of the best presented 3DS games out there, and you do yourself a disservice if you like strategy games but don't pick up this masterpiece. And that about does it for my list of 3DS games that I like the most. Now, this was a democratic selection, so there were a few categories that I sort of lumped together. Like, Virtue's Last Reward is by far one of the best games I've ever played, but I didn't want to include 2 Zero Escapes, for example. So I hope you'll take a lot of my picks with a grain of salt. Also, if you perhaps wanted a more conclusive order to this, well, like I said, I don't really like giving orders to my lists, but Zero Time Dilemma and Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright are probably the 1 and 2 slots, with Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D and Super Mario 3D Land easily taking the bottom. Not because they're bad, but just because I like more story in my games and they just feel like basic platformers. Either way, none of these games should give you a problem if you decide to pick them up. Sure, they may have better Switch counterparts if you know where to look, But if you're a 3DS owner and are looking for games to buy, these are the 10 that I would hope you start with. With that, thank you very much for watching, and until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and Nintendo, make more songs as good as Lord of the Dead Empire. Bye!